This happened about 5 years ago. I'm 23 now and I don't live in that neighborhood anymore. Yesterday, when I visited my parents, I saw my creepy neighbor Paul, and it reminded me of what happened. Let me give you some background. I live in a third world country and my neighborhood is really rough. But other than that, everyone is friendly except for my creepy neighbor. His name is Paul. Paul is in his late 40s, lives alone, and always gives off weird vibes. He rarely talks to anyone, and when he does, it's always uncomfortable. He has these intense eyes that seem to look right through you, and his smile never reaches them. My parents always told me to be polite but avoid him, and I did my best to do just that. I remember it was a Friday evening and I was at home alone. My parents hadn't come home from work yet. I was there, minding my own business, listening to some good R&B music and chilling. Out of nowhere, this weird feeling came over me, like someone was watching me. It was such a strong feeling that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced around the living room, but everything seemed normal. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I saw him. My creepy neighbor Paul was peeping on me from over the fence. I was so frightened I nearly peed myself. His face was just there, staring at me with those intense eyes. I ran inside as quickly as I could, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was trying to calm myself down. I kept thinking, why was he watching me? What does he want? I tried to shake it off and tell myself he was probably just being his usual creepy self, but it didn't work. I was too scared. I decided to lock all the doors and windows just to be safe. A few minutes later, I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. I got so scared, hoping that it wasn't my creepy neighbor Paul. I asked, "Who is it?" in a loud voice, but no one answered. I waited, holding my breath, hoping it was just a mistake or someone passing by. Then, to my horror, I heard the door slowly creak open. I got even more scared now. I hesitated, but then decided to go check. When I looked, there was no one at the door. I was so relieved for a moment, thinking maybe it was just the wind or something. But when I turned around, there he was, standing in my living room. Paul. I didn't know what to do but scream as loud as I could, hoping that someone would hear me. My scream seemed to startle him, and for a moment he just stood there staring at me with those creepy eyes. He stepped closer and I backed away, my heart racing. He didn't say anything, just kept moving towards me with this strange look on his face. I was panicking, trying to figure out how he got in. Then I remembered I had left the back door unlocked in my rush to get inside. My mind was racing. I had to think of something fast. I made a run for the kitchen, hoping to find something to defend myself with. Paul was right behind me, moving quicker than I expected. I grabbed a kitchen knife and turned to face him, my hands shaking. "Stay away from me!" I yelled. Paul stopped and raised his hands, a creepy smile spreading across his face. "I just wanted to talk," he said, his voice calm and unsettling. I didn't believe him for a second. "Get out of my house!" I screamed, pointing the knife at him. For a moment, we just stood there staring at each other. Then, without warning, he lunged at me. I slashed out with the knife, catching him on the arm. He yelped in pain and stumbled back. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I ran for the front door, throwing it open and racing outside. I ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on their door and screaming for help. Luckily, they were home and called the police. Paul had disappeared by the time they arrived, but they found signs of a struggle and my bloody kitchen knife on the floor. The police took my statement and assured me they'd find him. They increased patrols in the neighborhood, and for a while, things seemed to calm down. My parents were horrified when they came home and heard what had happened. They wanted to move immediately, but it took a few months to sort everything out. Eventually, we did move, and I haven't seen Paul since. But yesterday, when I visited my parents, I saw him again. He was just standing across the street, staring at me with those same intense eyes. I quickly went inside, my heart racing like it did that night. It brought back all the fear and anxiety I thought I'd left behind. Seeing him reminded me of everything. I had to make sure I escaped from him, and now I'm more determined than ever to stay far away from that neighborhood. I don't know what he wanted or why he targeted me, but I'm just glad I got out of there. This happened about 10 years ago when I was still in school. Like many students, I didn't have much money growing up. To explain a bit more, I used to do babysitting to earn extra cash. There was this new family that had moved in next door to my house, a lady in her mid-20s and her 2 children. A day after they moved in, she came knocking at my door, asking if I could babysit for her. I was a bit surprised, wondering how she knew that I did babysitting for other people. Then she said my mom had told her I babysit. I hesitated for a minute, not sure what to say because I didn't know her like that. Then I remembered I really needed the extra cash because I had a school project coming up. So I told her I would do it and that I'd be over there in a few minutes. She smiled and said, "Thank goodness I didn't know what I would do if you had said no." I went over about 15 minutes later, and she started telling me about the kids and giving me all the instructions on what to do and what not to do. After all that, she started telling me about her personal life and why she had to move away. It was really weird. It's the first time while babysitting that someone told me about their life story. I started to have this weird feeling like she was running or hiding from someone. To be honest, I tried my best not to think too much about what she said. So I was there in the living room playing with the kids. Their names are Fiona and Jake, 2 lovely kids. As she was about to walk out the front door, she turned and said, "No matter who comes to the door, do not let them in." In my thoughts, I was like, what the hell is wrong with this lady? But then I just replied and said, "Okay." A few minutes later, I heard a knock at the front door. I thought she had forgotten something and turned back for it. But when I went to check, it wasn't her. There was a man standing at the door. He was in his late 20s, looking super handsome and everything. I said hello and asked what he wanted. He said that he came to see the kids and that he was their father. I hesitated a bit, trying to remember if she said anything about their father coming by to visit them. Then I remembered she said, "No matter what, don't let anyone in." I told him to give me a few minutes to call their mother. So I closed the door just for a minute to get the phone, only to come back and see him in the living room with the kids. I was so frightened and scared at the same time. I didn't know what to do. He was sitting on the couch with Fiona and Jake, and they looked confused but not scared. I tried to stay calm and asked him how he got in. He smiled and said the door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it, but I didn't argue. I told him he needed to leave and that their mother would be back soon. He ignored me and kept talking to the kids. I went to the kitchen and called their mother, trying to keep my voice steady. When she answered, I told her there was a man in the house claiming to be the kids' father. Her voice got really tense and she told me to keep the kids away from him and that she was on her way back. I hung up and went back to the living room. I tried to get the kids to come with me to another room, but the man got up and blocked my way. He looked angry now and I was terrified. He grabbed my arm and told me to sit down. I didn't know what to do. I had to make sure the kids were safe. Just then, I heard the front door open. The mother rushed in, her face pale with fear. She yelled at the man to get out, and he started arguing with her. I took the chance to grab the kids and run to the neighbor's house. We called the police, and they arrived quickly, taking the man away. It turned out he was her ex-husband and she had a restraining order against him. He had followed her when she moved to get away from him. After that incident, I never babysat for them again. The family moved away soon after, probably to find a safer place where he couldn't find them. I'll never forget how scared I was and how I had to make sure the kids were safe. I remember the police asking me a lot of questions. They wanted to know how he got in, what he said, and how long he was there before their mother arrived. It was overwhelming, and I was shaking the whole time. The police told me I did the right thing by calling their mother and getting the kids out of there. My parents were really supportive. They were shocked and angry when they found out what happened. They told me they were proud of me for staying calm and protecting the kids. But honestly, I didn't feel brave. I just felt scared and relieved that everyone was okay. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about the whole thing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face and felt his grip on my arm. I kept wondering what could have happened if their mother hadn't come back when she did. It was hard to sleep, and I kept checking the locks on our doors and windows. I also started to worry about the family. I hoped they were safe, and that he wouldn't find them again. It must have been so hard for the mother to deal with all of that and try to protect her kids at the same time. I wish there was more I could do to help them, but I knew they needed to keep their new location a secret. After a few weeks, things slowly started to get back to normal. I went back to school and focused on my studies. I still did some babysitting, but I was a lot more cautious about who I agreed to work for. My parents were more protective too, and always made sure they knew where I was and who I was with. One day, about a month after the incident, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the mother. She thanked me for what I did and told me that they were safe and doing well. She explained a bit more about her situation, how her ex-husband had been abusive and how she had been trying to start a new life for her and the kids. She said she would always be grateful to me for protecting her children. Reading that letter made me feel a bit better. It was a reminder that even though I was scared, I had done something important. I had helped keep Fiona and Jake safe, and that meant a lot to me. It also made me realize how important it is to be aware and cautious, especially when it comes to the safety of others. Over the years, I've thought about that day a lot. It's one of those experiences that stays with you, no matter how much time passes. It taught me a lot about courage, responsibility, and the importance of staying calm in a crisis. I also learned to trust my instincts and be more mindful of my surroundings. Now, whenever I hear about someone going through a tough situation or needing help, I try to be there for them. I know how much it can mean to have someone on your side looking out for you. And even though that day was one of the scariest in my life, it also showed me that I'm capable of more than I ever thought possible. So that's my story. It happened 10 years ago, but it feels like it was just yesterday. I'm grateful that I was able to help, and I'll always remember the lesson I learned from that experience. Sometimes, you have to face your fears and do what's right, even when it's hard. And most importantly, you have to make sure the kids are safe. So my life began a year ago when I graduated from high school. I was 18 at the time and really looking forward to moving out of my parents' house. Where I'm from, it's really hard to be yourself in a rough community where people only talk to you because they can get something from you. So I was really glad to move out and start a new beginning. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment. My mother helped me with the move, and she was so happy to see me starting a new journey in my life. It was a bright, sunny day and everything seemed perfect. My new place was cozy, and I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced before. A few hours later, I heard a knock at the door. In my head, I thought, who could that be now? When I went to check, there was a stunning girl at my door. I was so surprised that I started smiling. I asked her how I could help her, and she asked if she could come in. I said, yes, you may. She started telling me about how she saw me moving in and was waiting to introduce herself. Her name was Stacy. While we were talking, I heard a man's voice calling out for Stacy. At that moment, she started acting really weird and asked to use the bathroom. I started thinking, why is it that as soon as the man called out for Stacy, she started acting weird? I went to the door to take a look at who was calling for Stacy. When I opened my door, I saw a man in his late 20s with an angry look on his face. Our eyes made contact as I pulled the door open. I got so nervous seeing the angry expression on his face. He asked if I'd seen Stacy. I replied, saying that I just moved in and didn't know anyone by that name. He started describing her, and I realized he was describing every little detail about the girl that was in my apartment. I got even more nervous. Stupid me asked if he had called her cell phone to find out where she was. He started to call her phone, and we both heard it ringing in my apartment. He turned and looked at me with death, fear, and anger in his eyes. At that moment, I didn't know what to do but run and close the door. My heart was racing at 100 miles per hour. She came out of the bathroom saying she heard her phone ringing. In a soft voice, I whispered, "Your boyfriend is about to kill me." She started screaming and acting paranoid like someone was hurting her or something. Her crazy boyfriend kicked the door open, looking like death itself. I didn't know how I was going to make it out. He stormed into the apartment and I backed away, trying to think of a way to escape. Stacy kept screaming and I could see the rage building in his eyes. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed a lamp from the side table and held it out in front of me, trying to keep him at bay. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling. He paused for a moment, giving me just enough time to think. "Stacy, get behind me," I yelled. She moved quickly, hiding behind me as I tried to figure out a way to get us both out safely. The man took a step forward and I swung the lamp, hitting him in the arm. He grunted in pain but didn't back down. Seeing no other option, I made a dash for the door, pulling Stacy along with me. We ran out into the hallway, not looking back. I heard him shouting and chasing after us, but adrenaline kept us moving. We burst out of the apartment building and onto the street, desperately looking for help. We ran to a nearby convenience store and asked the clerk to call the police. Within minutes, the police arrived and we told them everything that happened. They went back to the apartment and found the man still there, raging and looking for us. He was arrested and taken away. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. I had moved out to start a new chapter, and within hours, I was running for my life. Stacy explained later that he was an abusive ex who had been stalking her. She didn't know he had followed her to my place. The police helped her get a restraining order, and she moved away for her safety. I stayed in the apartment, but I was much more cautious about who I let in from that point on. It took a while for me to feel safe again, but eventually, life returned to normal. That day taught me a lot about trust and caution. It was a harsh lesson, but it made me stronger. I had to make sure I made it out alive and safe, and thankfully, I did.